This episode of The Edge is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek.fm at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
You're listening to Trek FM.
What have you done out there on the edge of Federation space?
Hello and welcome to Tracks from the Edge, Trek FM's podcast in which we provide audio commentary for all 15 episodes of Star Trek Discovery. I'm Mike, and I'm joined today by Justin from Earl Grey. How's it going, Justin?
It's going great. Good to be back here with you again, doing a commentary.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. We are going to be talking about episode 7 of Discovery today, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. So, we are going to be starting this after the streaming service logo fades to black, or cuts to black, as the case may be. So after the CBS All Access logo here in the States, after the Netflix logo elsewhere, or the Crave logo or whatever. So we're in black, which is about 8 or 9 seconds in on the American version. And if you're ready, Justin, we will start this up in 3, 2, 1, start. Previously on Star Trek Discovery. Okay, so this is kind of interesting because we've got this, recap, but then after that it goes straight into the title sequence with no teaser.
I noticed that. That's different from the other ones we've seen since episode 3, where it did go into the teaser right after the previously.
Mm-hmm. But, we're seeing a lot of mud stuff here, so I guess, it can be kind of assumed that we're going to get a mud episode.
I think it's interesting, the stuff that they choose to kind of prime you for what's coming, because they're choosing some things like going back, 1 or 2 episodes, sometimes 3 or 4 or more. So it's interesting what they choose to kind of highlight, which can kind of foreshadow what's going on in the episode, I think.
Yeah, it's weird because when I watched this the second time, I was kind of like paying attention to that to see like how much was like extra, how much it was unnecessary stuff, because occasionally that happens. And in this case, I thought it was pretty on point. I don't know how this show works or how most shows work, but I know on a number of shows, the assistant editors are tasked with cutting those previously on sequences. I mean, as with many things, I think there's kind of an apprenticeship thing going on in assistant editors whose day job tasks are things like, uploading content and, making sure that everything is cataloged and all that stuff so that the editor can just come in and do their thing. Occasionally they are given the task of editing a scene or something like this in order to, kind of like prove their talents as, creatively speaking. So,
oh, that's interesting. So we have the credits coming up here, and I noticed that it's co-written by Jesse Alexander and Aaron Colite. I never know how to pronounce his last name, but
I think it's Colite. I think I heard
okay.
Fuller say Colite at one point. Yeah,
and they co-wrote Butcher's Knife, right?
Yeah, they did, which I think is interesting because I don't know how you feel, but I personally feel like Butcher's Knife was the best episode up till now, and I kind of think that this is the best episode now. So in my mind anyway, they've written the 2 best episodes of Disco.
Interesting. Well, I like both of them a lot. I think Lethe is my favorite, though.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So this is interesting. It starts out with a personal log for Burnham, and I know we've seen a first officer's log from her before, but I don't think we've seen a personal log from her, or I don't know if we've seen a personal log from anybody else so far.
Yeah, maybe not. Yeah, and we get a star date, which I think might be the first time that happens too, right?
That's true. We'll have to look at that and compare it to if it's actually in alignment with stuff you see in TOS and elsewhere. But
yeah, I'm also curious about the map. I'm assuming that they used Larry Nemechek's stellar cartography maps as the basis for whatever it is that's here. But I'm curious to see how accurate it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So running in a disco shirt again, and
yes,
looks like this was from one of the previous episodes that they're using here.
I think that's quite possible. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's an interesting framework to kind of, besides the previously, also catch you up a little bit and then get you into the real action, which is tonight we're having a party.
Yeah, and it really kind of sets the stage for where we're at in the series. Like this is essentially their take me out to the holosuite in a lot of ways.
/ cause and effect.
Well, yeah. Like the idea that it's like the stakes are not, obviously they're high because everyone dies dozens of times, but the stakes are not high in terms of like the war, you know what I mean? Or that's not accurate either. I guess I would say it's not impactful to the overall storyline. You could very easily lift this episode out of the show, I think. Who knows for sure.
I guess we'll need to see, because who knows, maybe beer pong becomes important in settling the Klingon War later.
Yeah.
Who knows?
It's true. I kind of love this party sequence. I think beer pong Tilly is my favorite Tilly so far. But yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So you see them having a good time, lighting it up, because so many of the episodes have been so intense. It was nice to, some music, people dancing, having a good time. It breaks things up. And of course, at the end of the episode, I think this is the first one in Discovery where no one actually permanently dies. So, it's more like what you would see in, let's say, TNG, where things might get reset or there's not consequences going forward. So that's interesting.
Yeah, no one permanently dies, and yet they probably kill more people in this episode than they have in any other episode or every other episode combined.
Yeah,
but
50 plus times.
Yeah. No, this is. I'm really glad that they're able to stick stuff like this in, because it really is kind of like a throwback to, Deep Space Nine, or the X-Files is the show that I think is kind of like the master at this type of thing, where you've got, some sort of like super duper serious, mythology episode one week, and then the next week it's a comedy, like flat out, like Howard Hawks screwball comedy. And, this doesn't go that far, but certainly the tone is much lighter and comedic. I would consider this to be a comedy,
I think so. Especially the stuff with Mudd and how he's the way he's acting and hamming it up, as we'll see. Yeah, I think it's pretty funny, and probably laugh more in this one than some of the other ones. Even a small thing like this, like they run into each other and some stuff fall. It's different, and Stamets is all touchy feely and all that. So
yeah,
it's totally different, which is cool.
This was really kind of surprising to me, because like I didn't watch the preview for this one before going into it, so I really had no idea what to expect. I think they showed this scene on After Trek, so I saw this scene, but that was it. And I got the impression, especially, after last week or whatever, where they start sort of like planting the seeds for, mushroom Stamets. And I kind of thought that this episode was going to be all about like the psychological effects of the mushrooms on Stamets, oh, we're setting this up and, things are going to go bad. Maybe it's not a good idea to inject yourself with tardigrade DNA and, plug yourself into a ship in order to transport it across the galaxy. But that's really not what they're doing here at all. And it's kind of refreshing almost that they didn't do this thing, which I thought was kind of the predictable, next step, which is like, oh, what's wrong with Stamets? How are we going to do? They don't do that. They're like, he's weird and different now, but it's cool, It's
cool. It'll be like that for however long we need it to be,
Yeah.
So they're up on the bridge and they see this new creature, Gormagander, which they've definitely made up for this. So another new alien species, which is cool.
I guess we've seen this type of thing before, like in that episode Tin Man from Next Generation.
Yeah, the space creature that's in some distress. Yeah, I could see that. But like I was watching Lorca sometimes because he is just like, I don't give a damn about this thing. Just do whatever I don't care, you know? There's no battle, there's no Klingons, there's no war. What am I even doing in this chair? That's kind of the look that he's giving, like, I'm useless right now.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny.
I mean, I guess I don't understand like much about zoology or whatever, but they're like, it's an endangered species. We have to take it and bring it back to like a zoo or something, you know?
Well,
like
I mean, it's probably similar to how on Earth, if there's an endangered species, there's not very many, and you find one in the wild, you'll want to try to preserve it, put it into a breeding population so that the species as a whole is preserved. And because there might be some kind of predation or some issue where they're being, where they're dying. So I could see that.
I guess that makes sense. Yeah, if it's for like breeding purposes or something.
And here's Andorian space helmet guy, who we know as Mud later.
Yeah.
Have a crazy helmet.
I mean, when this happened, I was just like, okay, what's going on? Because, I mean, the helmet is great. I mean, the helmet really is, I don't think that they were like, oh, yeah, we should really show what Andorian helmets look like. I think they were like, wouldn't it be funny if he did this? Because it is such like a 50s B movie, visual.
And actually the way that the antennae, it kind of looked like rabbit ears to me, like on a rabbit. So it looked like this almost like bug rabbit. It's just a weird mix of stuff, but it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's great, And here we hear, I mean, I guess this is the first time.
When I saw this, when we were seeing Mud, I was like, oh, he's out for revenge, and that's, such a tired motivation. But I mean, they turn it into something that's really fun and interesting. So I like that.
Yeah. And I guess more in keeping with Mud, because he's not like super duper vengeful, but he is always trying to make a buck, so this is obviously...
Yeah, and it's interesting that he comes out of that creature, he immediately like kills a couple of people, but he knows that he can reset it, and maybe it won't even be necessary to kill anybody. So I think that's just like his leverage, but I don't know.
It was really kind of shocking, like right off the bat being like, whoa, he killed, like, because they say like fatalities. I'm like, really? And then when he blows this thing up, and talks about like next time, I'm like, oh, time travel. Okay.
Is it? Yeah. So what's interesting about this episode is we talk about reset buttons in Star Trek. Mud has a literal reset button in his hand. Yeah. I think that's awesome in a way.
It's cool seeing disco blow up.
Blows up. And now let's look at it from a slightly different perspective with some disco lights in time to the music.
Yeah.
Which
is great.
I mean, when I saw that, I was like, oh, they're taking a bit of the Frakes approach and cause and effect of having some different angles and stuff. But it pretty quickly, I think, even in this second loop that we're seeing became, quite different. Whereas in something like cause and effect, it was only subtly different each time, and it would just kind of gradually change. But
yeah, I noticed that too. I almost feel like perhaps they were aware that Star Trek audiences are going to pick up on this thing pretty quickly. So instead of sort of like boring people with, repetition, you can use shorthand that people will understand and not be confused by.
Yeah, and that's what I felt. It was like an homage to cause and effect, but it was a good twist on it too that they got to pretty right away. And, I love cause and effect, and I don't mind the repetition. I think it's pretty brilliant, but I wouldn't want a rehash of that because you want something different. So
yeah. And I mean, it's not at all limited to cause and effect, of course. I mean, it's very similar to Groundhog Day. And there's actually a movie out right now in theaters which has an extremely similar plot to this, which is called Happy Death Day, about a woman who is killed and then it resets and she wakes up that morning and then she's killed again. And the whole thing is she needs to figure out who her killer is and basically stop that person from killing her in order to break the cycle. So that's a very good movie, by the way. Check it out.
Okay. I mean, I think of cause and effect not only because it's Star Trek, but because it actually came out before Groundhog Day and kind of, I don't know. I like Groundhog Day and how they do it there too, but and this I think picks up on some of those things with, so many different like repetitions, and he's, trying all of these different things, and anyway.
Yeah.
So here.
Yeah. So I was a little, I guess, confused. It seems like it takes them a while to, and I guess, if someone were to come up to me and say like, you're in a time loop and, it's all going to lead back to this space whale, I'd be suspicious, but I guess like in the Star Trek world, I feel like that's a totally plausible thing. So
hey, weird is part of the job, right?
Exactly. So like I feel like it's weird that they don't, because here they're like, wait, belay that order, and then instead of saying to Lorca like, Stamets just told us that we were going to run into this thing, and he's saying that the ship's going to blow up. They're like, we want to take the lead on this. Is that okay? It's like, why wouldn't they just tell Lorca right off the bat?
Well, I mean, do you think it's because Burnham has gone through this whole experience of being a mutineer and being in prison, and Tyler's been a POW, and they're afraid that he'll just think that they're having some after effects from that, and they just need some more information first before they'll really bring it to him?
I think at the very least, especially since they know the clock isn't ticking, or they don't know that the clock is ticking at this point, I think that they would just say like, this is really strange. Like, this may not be anything, but we just got stopped by Stamets in the hallway, and he said that this was going to happen. So can we look into it? It's
a good point. But I mean, at the same time, Lorca's giving this attitude like, I don't want to hear about anything. Just deal with it. So,
well, sure. But he doesn't want to hear anything about his space whale. And they're talking about the ship blowing up, which is, a bit different. I don't know.
No, good point. So anyway, there was the space whale, which looked pretty cool. But all of a sudden, a spore jump. I think that surprised me that they were going to take it there that quickly. Just try to do a jump.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at this point, I didn't quite know what they were going to do through each loop or what was going to happen, which is pretty cool for an episode where at the end it's going to basically end up kind of, well, it doesn't end up where it started really. It goes forward a little bit, but
yeah.
I like Mudd's explanation, like, yeah, there was some magic with that bug I had and I got out. I don't need to tell you anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although, like on After Trek, Rainn Wilson had his own theory that, Mudd's working with the Klingons and that they freed him to send him here to try to take over the ship, which could make sense.
Could be fine too, yeah. I like how it doesn't really matter, so they just kind of gloss over it because, whatever.
Yeah. Just trying to figure out what goes on in this chamber.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of makes sense he can't figure it out because it seems kind of crazy that Stamets would be the key to it, that you'd like plug him into this thing and it would make it go. I mean, I think that would be way beyond what he would think would happen, right?
Yeah, and he's not, some sort of like engineer either. So, this is like this completely weird new technology.
Although, like in all of these loops, it seems like he's become an expert on gaining control of Discovery's computer, right?
That's true.
He's learned that much at least, but maybe he's better at that.
And I love this, as days goes, this is a weird one. I mean, that's kind of perfect. And
yeah.
I mean, like just looking at Stamets now, I mean, like looking at him in episode 3, he was the one character who I was just like, oh God, I cannot stand this guy. I really do not care about Stamets at all. And as this show has progressed, like he's now become one of my favorite characters. And I mean, part of that is because of the mushroom thing, but I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with, Rapp's performance. I think that he's really good at sort of like, and the dialogue, which is written for him as well. Like it's almost this sort of like quirky Joss Whedon-ish kind of character, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. So back for another loop.
Yeah.
I like that. Go
ahead.
I was going to say, I like that, that basically, on Discovery, which they're calling disco, they have kind of this little disco, and they're playing like a Wyclef Jean song that samples a disco song, Staying Alive. It's just kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's like multiple levels of disco.
Yep, it is pretty great. And when the thing keeps on blowing up, it's like Disco Inferno, right? So, but I do like here now, we're only on our third loop, and yet, as far as the editing is concerned and everything, it's already getting very efficient. We're not seeing anything more than what we have to. Because we've already established this baseline, and that's...
Yeah, they don't need to go over some of the other things. It's like party, Stamets confronts her and tells her some more stuff.
Yeah.
Now, you notice, like, in each loop, it seems like that Stamets's jacket is, like, a little bit lower, like he's trying to, like, tired of being in this uniform and just, like, gradually unzipping it.
Yep. I do think that as the story progresses and we get a little bit towards the end, there's a weird shifting in perspective from Stamets to Burnham in some ways. And I almost wish there was a little bit more, because it gets confusing. Like at some point you're like, is she remembering what's going on? But I'm sure the implication is supposed to be that, as he's learning more about her, sort of like triggers in order to get her to do certain things, he's telling her these things in order to basically push her buttons in a certain way. But I don't know, there is something about it which is really weird, because it seems like it would be much more efficient if he were to kind of like take the lead on some of this stuff. Like, I kind of don't buy like, oh, well, I tried this and it didn't work, so now I need to convince you to do this. That's just, I don't know.
Yeah, I could see that. So I love this this part where Mudd says, there's so many ways to blow up this ship, it's almost a design flaw.
Yeah.
And there's so many times when it's not, our hero ship of the show that, like, a little thing goes wrong and it just explodes, or, they get hit by a photon torpedo and it just explodes in a battle or something.
Yeah.
So I like those little commentaries. Yeah, so I mean, so he's remembering each thing through this loop, and it makes you think, like, having him have the DNA of this multidimensional creature, does it just serve the idea here and they found it as they went along, or is that one of the things when they were constructing the season that they were like, and it'll totally work over here when we have this time loop episode? I just wonder.
Well, I have a theory. I don't know about this, but we know that this was originally intended to be 13 episodes, and then they expanded it to 15. And we know that Brian Fuller said that originally there was no time travel and there were no characters from the, original series. And this has both time travel and a character from the original series. So I kind of think that I'm almost 100% positive, if what Fuller was saying was to be believed, I'm almost 100% positive that this was, basically created after he left. But I also kind of think that when they got the order to expand to 15, this was an idea where they were like, here, we can add this, because it does feel kind of tacked on. It doesn't feel like it's necessary for the overall story in any way. So
like the two extra ones are this one and the other one with Mudd?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't think. I think maybe the other one with Mudd was modified, after the fact, and they, added Mudd, later on or whatever. But I think the basic structure for that one still existed in some form or another.
Yeah. See, that's interesting, because when I thought about the expansion from 13 to 15, I thought that the original thing that had happened was the first two episodes were actually a condensed or compressed part of what's now the third episode, and that they decided to like expand it a little bit based on the footage that they had into the first two episodes, because the second one is pretty short. It's like 37 minutes or something like that. But
that could be
wrong.
That could definitely be too. But this is a really cool sequence here. It actually reminds me a lot of The Limey. I don't know if you've ever seen The Limey. It's an amazing. It's one of the best movies ever.
And I like here when he's eating something on the bridge. It makes me think of in '09 when Kirk's like chewing on an apple, looking at the Kobayashi Maru scenario.
Yeah,
it's like whatever. But yeah, all of these ways, and he says there's 53 ways that it's 53 times that they've gone through this loop. So, and
the way that they kind of like done that, I mean, lots of these sort of, Groundhog Day-ish, shows or movies have the sort of montage, and I think that one's really cool, the way that it's kind of done in like, single shot, sort of things. And I do think that the direction in this is really, really good. It was directed by a guy named David M. Barrett, who is actually a Trek veteran. He directed an episode of Enterprise, Divergence.
Did he really? Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know that.
The second part of the augment virus.
So would he be the first director then who previously directed a Star Trek episode on Discovery? I mean, first Discovery director.
Yeah, right. Because Frakes is later on, and I don't think there have been any others. So yeah.
Interesting. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, that was the one. The one he did was the one where like they got a transfer trip from the Columbia to the the Enterprise while it's in warp. That's the one.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So
yeah, interesting. So Stamets trying to convince Burnham again.
Yeah,
yet again.
it's kind of cool to see like some of the bridge crew and everything, partying instead of seeing them just pushing buttons on the bridge.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, I want to see a little bit more about them, like Detmer and Arium as the augmented human and some of the other people. I mean, it's cool to see them in other situations, and I don't know how much room they'll have on the show or at what point, but it would be nice to have, a little bit more about some of those secondary characters.
Yeah.
So they're talking about, Tyler and Burnham, and, I could definitely feel within the last couple of episodes that they were kind of trying to edge it towards some kind of romance. And like, as far as things like that in Star Trek, I'm fine with whatever happens as long as it seems kind of believable. I mean, I guess it, you can feel some of that, but I don't know if I've made like a determination or if I care much about it yet, but I don't usually object to whenever they have, different people together. I don't know how you feel.
No, I don't. I mean, I was always like, the original series, it was such a, week to week thing that there wasn't really room for that. It was always romances with outside, people. And on on Next Generation, it was extremely frustrating how, this ship, which was designed as like a family, environment, how no one, aside from like Miles and Keiko, were in any sort of relationship. That was like very bizarre.
And you'd never seen Keiko before the episode where they're getting married.
Yeah, right. So, Deep Space Nine obviously kind of went into that, full throttle or whatever, and it just made perfect sense. And I think it worked really well. And I know there are some people who are just like, I don't need to see this, get this out of Star Trek. Why does everything need to be about
it's a part of life, right?
Yeah, I don't understand that at all. I mean, it's almost like it's just a thing that happens.
Yeah. And here, where they're just kind of holding hands and just calmly like, well, we're going to meet our fate again. It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
All right, another loop. I think I've lost track how many we've actually seen. 5, 6, something.
Well, it's hard to keep track because, like, with the mud thing, we essentially have, like, flashbacks to a bunch of loops.
That's true. That's true. Oh, I just have to point out, so they used Al Green's Love and Happiness here, and that made me so, so happy because I love Al Green's music so much, so that put a big smile on my face that they did that. I like some of the things that they're doing, as far as putting in references, and they had a reference to the Beatles and stuff like that. I hope in a certain way, it's like, they're referencing all this 20th century stuff that's from, 200 now I guess about 300 years before. But in some ways, it's better than what they did on Next Generation, where they like have these classical concerts where they'd be playing like 500 or 600-year-old pieces. So I'm okay with it. I mean,
my feeling has always sort of been like, in the way that the classical music is okay because it's already stood the test of time, here in the 21st century. Like, the Beatles are going to exist 200 years from now,
Yeah, but think of it this way. Like, would people slow dance to something from the 1700s, like 300 years ago? Like, this song would be 300 years from them. I don't know.
I think about that a lot, like not just in Star Trek, but just in like life, And I think the big difference and the thing which is going to change a lot of the future going forward. I mean, I'm almost wondering if maybe like cultural changes are going to like start slowing down because of media, because like we don't have any TV shows from the 1700s. We don't have any, albums from the 1700s. We have music which we can recreate based on, sheet music or whatever, but like we don't have recordings. And I feel like, as media is, I mean, it's taking over. It's everything, everywhere, right? We now have like much more documentation about like what 2017 is like than we do about what 1717 is like. And that's going to stay around until 2217,
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a really good point that a lot of that stuff could stay around. But I mean, part of it is that they have no idea what popular music will be like in, 250 years. So
Sure.
They have to use things from earlier or make it sound like kind of spacey, new agey or something like that.
Yeah.
There was a Betazoid reference. I have to point it out. Betazoid reference. I love that.
There you go. Yeah, which I think they could do, and they have done. Like they did it in the JJ movies with, a couple of songs, which I desperately want that one from Star Trek '09, which they've never released. I don't know why. The bar music.
Okay.
Which is credited to Cyrano Jones, I believe. So, yeah. If anyone has that, let me know. Hook me up.
Technobabble, non-equilibrial matter state.
Yeah.
A time crystal. When they mentioned a time crystal, I was like, oh, kind of like an orb of time, a magic time thing.
Yeah.
But that's fine. And then she talks about this 4-dimensional race that might have perfected the technology. Okay, so when are we going to have that episode where we see the 4-dimensional race? Because I really want to see that.
Yeah, she just kind of like throws it out there, and you're like, "Ooh, we're going to see this." And
4-dimensional race.
Yeah, oh yeah, okay, cool.
Oh yeah, we saw one last week. No big deal. Like what? Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here where it's so much the stuff you've seen in Star Trek before, like the technobabble and all that, but they're doing it and like putting it together in a little bit different way. And I don't know. I feel like there's so much on Discovery that's kind of like, in some ways, like mixing and matching certain things. Like you can see elements in this episode, TOS, TNG, DS9, Enterprise. I mean, there's all of like these different elements that they're kind of bringing together to stitch into something kind of different and creative in its own way. And I really like that.
Yeah, it really is, I think, in a lot of ways, the most Star Trek episode in the traditional sense, because it is standalone and you just kind of get to see this crazy sci-fi idea play out over the span of 45 minutes.
I mean, and even like something like Voyager, where you see all kinds of crazy time and anomaly stuff. This is kind of like that, right? Mm-hmm. Or there's some creature that comes by that has this weird thing. So, I mean, it's elements of a lot of those different things, but they're not just like taking it whole cloth, like let's redo, cause and effect or something like that. They're just taking all these different elements, and I really like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you get when you have, lifelong fans, writing this show. I mean...
Well, and even the animated series, of course, they put in different elements. I mean, I think so far in like 7 episodes, they probably had like references and elements from every single iteration of Star Trek.
Yeah.
Which is really something. Like all the 6 previous iterations have been in the first 7 episodes and referenced in some way, which is really cool.
There were a few, I don't know, I remember seeing on After Trek, there was like a graphic that said it had like a few references that they pointed out for this one, and I have absolutely no memory what they were. But
yeah, and I just watched it this morning, but I'm not knowing which references. Oh, there goes Tyler.
All right.
But in watching this episode, and even if you didn't know it was a reset, it's like, I don't think he's really going away.
Yeah.
Yeah, more mud. Oh, calling through the beanpole. So on After Trek, Rainn Wilson was saying they took a bunch of takes of this, and every single take he'd give the people like different nicknames.
Yeah, he said including like inappropriate one.
Yeah, he at one point he called Manute Bol for Saru.
Although I think the best one was Avatar.
Yeah. Oh goodness. I mean, they were also talking on After Trek that that Jonathan Frakes, when he visited the set, felt like he saw, a lot of like the camaraderie and fun that he saw on the TNG set. And I can totally see that from how they interact and what you've seen of the different cast members. So I think they're having a great time when the cameras aren't rolling. So
I don't know what piece of music this is. I'm kind of curious.
It's some classical piece, right? Yeah. I don't know, but and that reminded me of when you had what was it? There was some issue on the Enterprise D computer, and all of a sudden it started blaring some classical music, and Picard got really angry about that. Yeah. I forget which one it was. Maybe it was the one with the nanites. So you said Beer Pong Tilly was your favorite. I think like Tilly with a hangover doing science is my favorite.
Okay,
because she's like, okay, I'll see what I could do for you here, but. And it's kind of funny, too, because, Burnham, has all of this science knowledge and she's relying on Tilly as the cadet. So I guess Tilly has, it's clear that she has some brilliance, but I don't know if they've really gotten into it too much. Like
they say she's the best theoretical engineer on the ship. They've said that before.
Yeah. So with a hangover, she's even better than the second best sober, I guess. I don't know. So more science. And I kind of love this stuff when Tilly and Burnham are just kind of working together. It kind of reminds me of when you'd see like Janeway and Torres on Voyager just like working through the science together. It's just pretty cool to see.
Yeah.
And Mudd doing a captain's log. Which we haven't actually seen all that many captain's logs so far.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. But
this might be the first. Well, I guess there was in the this might be the first, right?
It could be. And I'm trying to remember, is this the first one? Like, have we seen a Lorca or Georgiou captain's log? I don't know if we have.
I was trying to pause on that map when you see it the first time to see what's there, like along the border and stuff.
I think it's similar to one we saw previously that had places like Khitomer and Rurapente and Mempa and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I haven't had a chance to look at it in detail if it's any different. But I did notice on the map it says Alpha/Beta Quadrant Overview, and it says Alpha Quadrant, Beta Quadrant, which I think is probably pretty rare to actually see that on a map on screen in Star Trek, where it specifically mentions the different quadrants.
Yeah, because isn't it supposed to go through like the solar system or something like that?
Yeah, the division between the Alpha and Beta Quadrant, I think, is supposed to be right around where Earth is, or somewhere in the middle of the Federation.
Yeah.
At least from what I've read. Yeah. Mention of Takuvma. Yeah. And they haven't even talked about him much for a little while, but
it's almost like they forgot about him.
Yeah. I don't know, would Mudd not know what Burnham looks like? Maybe he's been in the prison the whole war and doesn't know? I don't know.
Yeah, that could be. Well, Tilly didn't know what she looked like either. Remember?
That's true. Although, I don't know. I mean, you don't get it too often in Star Trek where they talk about media coverage of stuff and but you'd think if it were like it would be now and it was something that was well known, you'd know what somebody would look like, but who knows?
Yeah.
Well, here she goes, biting into those terrible crystals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I love how she identifies Mudd's greed and she's like, he's going to have to reset it because he wants more.
Yeah.
Yeah. It works.
It's a bit of a gamble. It's also a bit of a gamble. Coming up the next time through when, he deactivates it, there's still stuff that they need to do after, the time loop has ended. It's definitely, they need to make sure that everything is perfect in order to.
Yeah. And they definitely go through this one pretty quickly, where it's like Burnham sees Tyler and other people are doing stuff, and
yeah.
So I guess because they don't really need to get into it too much, it's just like they know what's going on and they got a plan. So
and they just have shots like this one where Stamets is sort of like watching over, almost like implying that he's the one who is sort of manufacturing all this stuff. Although I do kind of wish that they would have adjusted the perspective a bit, because it really is told from Burnham's perspective for the most part. And I wish that it would be told from Stamets' perspective, I think.
Yeah. And I didn't even think about that much when I was watching it the first time, but I don't know. In a way, the entire show is really about Burnham and from her perspective. And there are just places where, it makes more sense for the story for it to be from someone else's perspective. But
yeah, and I guess you run into the danger of it becoming too much like cause and effect, where the person who knows what's going on is the one telling the story. And also then you run into problems like you need to have him realize like what's going on. And so I guess I kind of see, maybe I changed my mind. I can see why they do it from, but I wish there would have been a bit more from his perspective just to clarify things, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that. And I like how it's just going so easily for him. And I think Mudd a lot of times thrives on the confrontation. And not seeing any confrontation, it's not as much fun. I mean, like in a way, I think in a way he's a bit like Q. Of course, doesn't have the powers, but he just kind of thrives on like making people squirm in the conflict. Mm-hmm. And they actually threw in a reference there. I don't know if it happens a little bit later. We saw it before, but when Mudd calls Lorca Mon Capitan, makes you think of Q. So I think that's deliberate.
I was kind of wondering, watching this, with this being the second episode with Mudd that we've seen, and with they're all it being rather comedic in nature and everything. I was kind of wondering, like, do they plan to make Mudd their Q?
And I couldn't tell, like, at the end of the episode, like, okay, is he's off to do his thing that leads him into where we see him with Kirk later, or does he come back? And I'm okay if this is the last time that we see him, because he's kind of been sent off on his journey toward where we, meet him.
Sure, yeah, we don't need
future
to see him
/ past.
Yeah, but we do know that he's not going to stay out of the Federation's hair forever, and we do know that that's 10 years in the future as well. So a lot of ground to cover. But,
yeah. So I mean, I guess we'll see. But we don't know. Maybe he'll become somehow critical to ending the war in some way. That would be crazy. Oh, there it is. Adieu, mon capitaine.
With this being such a standalone episode, it really does kind of shift perspective. I know people were talking about, because before they're like, it's chapters in a book and each one leads into the next and blah blah blah. And in the past few weeks we've seen some fragmentation of that larger story, and people saying like it's not as
it's standalone in a certain way, in that it's not necessarily feeding into like the narrative as a whole, but it's not in another way because there was all this stuff that was set up with Mudd in a previous episode. So, I mean, maybe it's like sometimes if you'd have a TNG episode that you could technically see as standalone, but it's something where Gowron's coming back and continuing that storyline, but you could just watch it as its own thing as well,
Yeah, I mean, I guess, the way that they were talking about it, I was thinking of it being, almost like 24 in nature or something like that. But I mean, really, it's not too dissimilar from what they did in the later seasons of Deep Space Nine or the
third season of Enterprise,
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But
yeah, definitely. Although I'd say in the third season of Enterprise, you got stuff that was even more standalone, like North Star, which in a way has nothing to do with the rest of it. It's like, hey, let's stop over at this planet and see what's going on. I love that episode, but has absolutely nothing to do with the storyline as a whole. And this has at least tangentially some things to do with the Klingon War, and that's what he's scheming about. But
yeah, and that's kind of why this episode, like in a lot of ways, I feel conflicted about this episode, because looking at it just on its own terms, I think it's like the best episode they've done. And yet, looking at it in the overall series so far, I feel like it's extraneous and could easily be eliminated. So I almost feel like while it works, better than anything else as its own thing, it may possibly hurt the series on the whole. You know what I mean? I don't know. I just it's a weird conflict there.
I can see that. I mean, and for me, I like, as I said at the beginning, Lethe is still my favorite because I think what they did with Burnham and Sarek and feeding into explaining some stuff about Spock was really amazing. And I don't think this overtakes that in terms of like how that made me feel or how good that was. But like I did see from a lot of people that they were saying this is my favorite one so far because they were having just a lot of fun with it. And I think for a lot of, like, I try to make the distinction sometimes between favorite and best, because favorite might be the one that you come to and you want to see again and again because you love it and it's a fun ride. But best might be like the most impactful, the best message, the one that moves you the most, Yeah,
and that's always something which, I struggle with. I mean, it's like I love Crossroads starring Britney Spears. Is it a good movie? I don't know, but I love it. And part of me thinks like, is there any separation? Because there's obviously something which is working on, a level of engagement, whereas, you look at something like, The Road or whatever, and you're like, this has got like a really interesting message, and yet it's kind of unwatchable. You know what I mean? So, I mean, there's certainly like a give and take there, but like, I don't know. It's very, very tricky and interesting. I mean, as far as Lethe is concerned, that's my least favorite episode so far.
Really?
Yeah, I liked it, but I definitely think it's the weakest one that they've had.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's interesting with these episodes as they air, because you see a whole range of opinions, from this is my least favorite to I love this so much, and we're at the opposite on that one.
and I've really tried hard and failed, like in this conversation right here, to sort of like reserve judgment until it's all over, but yeah, I don't know. I think this is the best episode for me, at least.
Okay.
Although, yeah, maybe not the best for the series on the whole. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So
go ahead.
Okay, we just saw the whole thing where they send Mudd on his merry way, and I find that to be very, very bizarre, because it's like, yeah, okay, whatever, but still, he's got a ton of information. I mean, if he wanted to come on this ship and take it over, he probably could, and also,
and he knows the top secret parts of the spore drive and how it works, right?
Right. And Stamets and everything. And, I wouldn't trust him. I wouldn't be like, oh, my father-in-law is rich, so I don't have to steal anything anymore. I mean, that doesn't.
I mean, in a way, it's a very TOS ending, because it's just like, yeah, you did some stuff, but, whatever.
Yeah.
Send you off on the way with a laugh, right?
It's like he literally killed everyone dozens of times. And while for all of them, it might be like, well, whatever. I mean, Stamets, he felt that. He felt himself dying, dozens of times. He would have like PTSD, I mean, and they're not going to deal with that, I don't think, although you never know. I mean, they've surprised me with other things before that were, way crazier than that. But to just be like, yeah, fine, you can go, just don't come back. No, I mean, it's like, when he stole like a cracker from Lorca, Lorca's like, I'm going to leave you here with the Klingons to be tortured. Okay. Right. After blowing up the ship, like 60 times, he's not going to be like, fine, you can go. I don't know. That's weird to me.
No, I totally. Well, and it's kind of the way that they construct the episode, which just ended a minute ago, but the way that they've constructed it, it's such that I didn't even really think about that too much until after it was done. And I was like, wait a minute, he has all these secrets, and even if, there's a reset and nobody really died, he knows all of the secrets of this ship. He's dangerous. Who knows if he's working with the Klingons, all this stuff, right? Yeah.
And I know that tone is a big thing, and we talked about how this is a comedy and it's lighthearted and you're doing something for a certain effect and all this stuff. And, that's all well and good. And like, if this were a standalone thing, I'd be like, okay, that's cool. But since it is part of this, larger whole, I think that it kind of messes that up. I don't know. I mean, like, I keep on thinking about the X-Files and how, like, masterfully it played with those two things. And certainly there was some, you know, conflict in there in terms of that idea of, like, the stakes being, you know, whatever they are or whatever, and, you know, the consequences for those things. But, I mean, this seems to be, I don't know, crossing a line into unbelievability, which is maybe just a little too much. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Okay, but it's the best, maybe not.
Yeah, I think looking at it on its own terms, it's the best. And yet I also think that looking at it on the series on the whole, it may be the most harmful to the show, to the overall show. You know, I don't know. I mean,
okay.
I always think about like that
yeah.
There's this documentary about editing, and I think they talked to like Walter Murch or something about how he was editing some movie, and he's like, we need to get rid of this scene. And the director's like, okay, yeah. And he's like, okay. And he's like going to rip the tape to pull out the scene. And the director says, when I read this scene in the script, that's when I knew I could make this movie. And Murch is like, so does that mean you want me to leave it in? And the guy's like, no, take it out. It's like, it's your favorite thing, and yet you know that like getting rid of it will make the overall thing better. I don't know.
But I think it's relative. I mean, if you say it might be detrimental, it's not going to be detrimental in the way that, like, you know, and the children shall lead, Code of Honor, like the worst in Star Trek. It's not like that kind of detrimental at all. But I think part of what's happening is that, like, I think there's so much strength in this season that when you compare things on a relative basis, you can be like, well, this is my least favorite, or, you know, this is a little bit detrimental. But it's like within, I think, like a narrower range where I think they're doing things that are great, and it's not slipping down to like that kind of level of some of the episodes that I've talked about, right? It's not down there.
Yeah, you know, I just did a thing because, you know, obviously this has been, you know, well, I mean, everyone's talking about it and stuff, but like, you know, at one point there was a thing where someone was talking about Enterprise and, you know, it not being good or whatever. And Brandon said like, well, what about Unexpected? You know, I'm like, haha. And then I started looking at it, you know, and like episode 5 of Discovery is Choose Your Pain. Episode 5 of Enterprise is Unexpected. I mean, there's a certain perspective there. And then I was like thinking about it more, and I pulled out, I'm like, okay, we're 7 episodes in. I just pulled out lists of like the first 7 episodes of each show. And it's like ignoring everything else, just looking at these 7 episodes. What's the best series so far? And I mean, I think it's Discovery.
It's Discovery.
Yeah.
I think it is. I mean, because like, yeah, I was looking at it in terms of like, you know, the Next Generation, and what are some of the episodes you have in the first 7? You know, you have Encounter at Farpoint, which is all right, but then you have like The Naked Now, Code of Honor, The Last Outpost, which are terrible. I like Where No One Has Gone Before, Lonely Among Us is all right, but then you have Justice. So I mean, like, there's like, 3 out of or 4 out of 7 that are just like a lot of people don't like, and it clearly became stronger later. So I think when you compare it to Discovery, it's much stronger, and we're just looking at it within a narrower range when comparing them, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I love Next Generation with all my heart. Like, if you, I mean, you want to talk about like favorite shows, like historically speaking, I mean, there's no show which has had a greater impact on me or my life than Next Generation, but like those first 6 episodes, the only one of those which I would consider to be good is Where No One Has Gone Before, you know?
Yeah, I think it's the best out of the bunch, and I like it a lot. But a lot of the other ones, it's like, what were they thinking?
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of people, you know, it had been so long since there had been, you know, episodic Star Trek that it was just like, yep, no problem. Let's just see what's out there, you know. And they gave it a break, you know. But I think, yeah, they're really strong out of the gate. And as much as, you know, I also love Deep Space Nine, after Emissary, I mean, it was kind of rocky for a bit, right? I mean, they were trying to find their way in the first season, and I think for Discovery, even if there are better choices they could have made here and there, they know where they're going with it, and I think it's pretty strong because of that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, I guess that pretty much wraps up episode 7 of Discovery. Justin, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, you can find me elsewhere on the network, co-hosting Earl Grey. That's our TNG podcast with Amy Nelson and Richard Marquez. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm at TrekFan4747, where I tweet about nothing but Star Trek, and about to start tweeting out my Season 4 rewatch of The Next Generation. And you can also find me hanging around the Babel Conference on Facebook.
All right. You can find me right here on the network doing Stage 9, in which we talk about the people who make Star Trek. And you can also find me on thenerdparty.com doing a show called Great Shot Kid, and on my website, commentarytrackstars.com, doing Commentary Track Stars. And you can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K. Be sure to check out our Discovery coverage throughout the week. Live from the Edge airs on Mondays at 9 p.m. Eastern with Bruce and Brandy, and will be released as a podcast on Tuesday mornings. Then this show, Tracks from the Edge, will be available on Wednesdays. We'll discuss your feedback on Postcards from the Edge on Thursday. And of course, you can catch the full analysis on the Edge main show on Friday. Then to wrap up the week, join us for Notes from the Edge on Saturday with our own Chris Jones for links between Discovery and the broader franchise. You'll find all of these in the main feed for the Edge and in the Trek.fm master feed. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Discovery. The best place to do that is in the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook, where Amy Nelson will collect your feedback for Postcards from the Edge. You can also find us on Twitter at TrekFM, or send us an email using the contact form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and choose the Edge. We'd like to thank our associate producers today, Norman C. Lau, Tony Robinson, Thomas Puleo, Lisa Slack, Shoab Mirza, and Richard Rutledge. If you'd like to help us out and keep all of our shows going, and even become an associate producer yourself, visit patreon.com/trekfm for all the details. All right, well, thanks again for joining me, Justin. And we will be back next week to look at episode 8 of Discovery.